Well, you heard it here first. Thanks to patients, we're on our way to finding a cure for cancer, or at least a vaccination.
Find a little solution.
That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool to hear that, just as you hit 12 o'clock in the day. Okay, so I've got a few questions. If people have questions, please go to the microphones that are spread around, and I will try and look out for you. One of the things I thought we would start off with, gentlemen, and I didn't warn them that I was going to do this, but we've been sitting here for 2.5 days now hearing about patients' stories. And we've had lots of patients sitting on the couches in front of these microphones telling us who they are and, sharing a bit of themselves. And so I was wanting to ask you to do the same. Now, don't worry, it's not too scary. What I wanted to ask all of you is how all of you are really passionate about what you do and you're doing some fantastic work. How did you get here? Like, what was it that drove you when you were a kid, or did you find it when you were in your 30s? How did you get here? So maybe we'll start with you. Gils.
What drove me was a personal story.
Mm-hmm.
It's usually what happens. When my ex-wife was pregnant, she suddenly had a very serious cardiac condition. And a condition that, not properly treated, would have led to a medical condition called sudden death. I don't think I need to explain what it is. And because I had learned science when I was younger, the moment I heard this diagnosis, I went to a medical library and spent a week and a half reading about this condition called WPW. Many months later, a long medical problem, and multiple times where no one knew if she was going to live or not. After 2 open heart surgeries that were experimental, the first one that failed, the doctor said, you have to be aware that your wife is alive today because of the work that you did as a bridge between the medical team and the patient.
Wow.
And then 7 years later, she was diagnosed with cancer, except that suddenly the internet was there. And so we used the internet to avoid serious medical problems, misdiagnosis, mistreatment, and then decided within a month that it was just a good goal in life to build a system so that the same methodology could be used by many other people.
Oh, great. Well, great story. Thank you. Atul, what about you?
I guess I got my start early on. In high school, computers were just taking off. I think for the longest time I knew I wanted to do both, computers and medicine, but I thought it would be growing up to be a radiologist someday. Back then, that was the cool data visualization. And then I think midway through medical school training, I spent a year at NIH and heard about this amazing project called the Genome Project. And you realize how much of life is digital in some ways. Of course, a lot of analog on top of that. But for a computer kid back then, it was just the most amazing story. So I owe a lot to the training programs we go through. But it's also that early inspiration, I think, that gets kids excited, and they all of a sudden realize they're finding the right career path, whether it's the science magazines or it's NIH-funded labs, things like that. It's pretty inspirational. So I give it I thank my mentors, my training, my wife who keeps me in this field. So.
And how old are your kids?
I have one daughter, 10 years old.
Okay, and is she passionate about something?
She's passionate about science, as you can guess.
Oh, cool.
With 2 scientist parents.
Yeah.
She has already been to the Tech Museum in San Jose. If any of you spend any visitors here spending any decent amount of time here, I recommend going to the Tech Museum. And even there, they will teach a 6-year-old how to play with DNA. So that's how you get kids early in this field. The same way they can play with computers and robots there's also a DNA experiment that even a 6-year-old can do. So.
All right, there you go. Cool. Oh, I'm going to have to visit that next time I come back. And Yuri, he's like the coolest guy I know because your Twitter handle is just your first name. It's like you're like Dolly or something like that, or Madonna. So how did you get the Twitter handle? No, I was reading online. That when you first came to California, and probably like me, driving around Silicon Valley and just like awesome, like you go past buildings and there's Facebook and there's eBay and these, and you were really excited by that. And now here you are in the thick of it, working with these companies, making your own contributions. So how did you get here?
So I don't know, even when I was 10, I was somehow, telling my parents, let's buy a computer. So I gave all my savings, which at that time was around, I think, $100 worth of money. And together with my father, we bought the first computer, kind of. So, I went all in very early. And then I always kind of liked playing with computers. And then it was kind of very natural to play with one thing and another thing. And I got my PhD training in artificial intelligence in machine learning. But then I think what kind of really happened is the web, in a sense, right? Not the web just as a static library where, kind of we just browse, but really the place where we interact. And I think this is kind of where the big phase transition happened, where I got really excited because in some sense I see myself in some sense, writing down the equations almost like physics-like laws of human behavior, and on the other hand, trying to apply these laws to real life and really kind of make online places better. In some sense, for us to communicate and to interact with each other. So I think it's a very interesting combination of, in some sense, learning about human behaviors and also then engineering problems, mathematical problems behind it, and trying to kind of make everyday lives easier and better.
Okay, cool. And I'm going to skip now to the end. Okay, so you guys, you're at, whatever ripe old age. Apparently, thanks to Google, guys, we'll be here for a long, long time yet. So anyway, but you're looking back at your life and your achievements. What is it that you want to contribute to the world? What do you want to leave behind as far as in a professional sense? And I'll start with the youngest member of our panel.
So I don't know, the way I feel basically like, especially here in the Valley, as a kind of a kid in a candy store. And especially as I think every computer scientist should feel that way, in a sense that what we saw, right, like is everything we do, also all this genetic data and so on, there is some digital trace that this is left, or allows us to basically compute these things on a large scale, which allows us to kind of see things that were impossible to see before. So basically, we have the telescope we never had. And I think what really kind of where this is going is that basically, how do we use, I would say, let's call it data mining or analytics for social good? And this can be on health, can be kind of online, can be for policy, things like that. And this is really, for example, one thing that we are currently working on is we are trying to help criminal court judges make better decisions, right? We have like a database of 2 million court cases and trying to tell them, look, you should do this in this case and so on and so forth, and just kind of try to help and make the world better.
Okay, so you're just seeing possibilities.
Yeah,
and I'm sure you'll make many contributions. All right, thank you. Atul.
I think if I can look back on my career and see that we've made a meaningful difference for patients, I think I'd be happy. I think, first and foremost, I think if we come up with new drugs, new diagnostics, if we can prevent a disease, I'll be happy. If we can do it for, scale up and do it for multiple diseases, I'll be thrilled. I'm also, the educator in me loves the students that train in my lab, the postdocs, the staff. People leave my lab, they go on to do amazing things as well. So I'm really proud of them. So I think part of the legacy would probably be about the trainees that come through an institution like ours at Stanford. So,
cool.
And with that, that's how, in some ways, we have to scale to reach more people, to reach more diseases. We can't do enough ourselves. So.
Okay, cool. Excellent. And Gilles, aside from curing cancer, any other goals? Or?
A real goal, which is to help develop this world where we are all patients, so let's say people have real autonomy when it comes to care, medical care. If you just help build a system where people feel and really act with real autonomy, you don't know what they're going to do. We are living in a world where the experts are somehow interesting, but sometimes the lay people who get together with this networked effect will invent solutions to problems that no one focused on an expertise would ever have invented.
And that's the beauty in humanity, isn't it? And why healthcare is so complex as well, and why the rules of economics don't really work, because we're human beings and we're all unique and we have our own contributions to make, and we're unpredictable as well, which is, sure. And there's beauty in that, of course.
For many experts, it's really sad. In medicine, you need patients, real people.
It'd be cool if you're out of a job, wouldn't it? Don't know more patients.
Yeah.
If you've seen, what's the latest science fiction film, the one with Matt Damon? Elysium, something like that? Yeah, you haven't seen that?
I haven't seen it.
Okay, cool. Yes, if you're catching planes like these guys, I'm sure you've seen it. Anyway, yeah, because in that, for those of you who haven't, there is just this tube. It's sort of like an MRI type thing that you lie in, and it doesn't matter whether you've got a broken bone, a cold sore, or cancer. It just goes and you're fine. So yeah, doctors in that world maybe aren't needed as much. Cool. Okay, I'll ask a few work-related questions. I'm just checking the microphones. All right, so I wrote a few down. Atul, I'll start with you. You said in your talk that it's a crime that we don't publish our failures. And Jack talked yesterday as well in his impassioned speech at the start of the day about the cost of research and the cost of hidden research. And he was talking about the dollar cost, of course, and how his mum had to spend $35 per journal article for everyone he wanted. Good on her for doing that, by the way, Jack's mum, if you're watching. But at the same time, it's also that he talked really importantly about the cost of wrapping that knowledge up behind paywalls and all of the research and the knowledge that is not happening, the advances that are not happening because those things are locked away. But they are locked away, and there's business models behind why they are. I don't think there's anything else behind those reasons. Have you given some thought about what the business models can be to actually have all of that open research, open data?
Yeah, so that's a great question on the business models here. So, and there's a lot of different aspects to this problem. I think Jack really talks about this problem on just the publication side, where the publication is just to read, what presumably would be, a taxpayer-funded lab through NIH, let's say, or NSF, publishing a paper, and it's just still not accessible to a high school kid who needs to read that. I think that is a big problem. I think the business models are playing themselves out. So we've now really essentially shifted in some ways, just very quickly, over 5 to 10 years, I guess, that it's now acceptable for my lab to pay money so we pay the money up front now, in some ways, to publish an open access journal. And so it's a shifting of the costs in some ways, but it's also a lot of money in some ways. So,
and do you sorry to cut you off, but do you factor that into your grant application?
We have to.
There's this chunk of the budget that you now say, well, that'll be to publish the results of our work.
Exactly.
Not our failures, of
we
course.
do have to get the funding for that now, exactly. So one could imagine there's a trade-off, fewer people, fewer experiments for the cost of the publications. But the publication costs initially are quite high, so they could be anywhere from $1,500 to $3,000 per publication. So if you, for example, publish 10 of those, that might be a postdoc that you might not hire in your lab, let's say. So there are trade-offs there. I think now, because it is not that expensive to do the production here for these types of stories and these articles, that now journals or publication models are competing with each other based on price, it seems like. And I think that's what we're hoping for, that we'd get to.
Do you think, will that change the whole structure of the Class A publications and everything? If it's now competing on not just citations, but also on how expensive it is to publish in them?
Yeah, so the expense is one factor, but I think the tier of a journal itself is going away. I mean, so there are these badges that the journals themselves love, one of which is called the impact factor. So how often is a paper in their journal cited every 2 years, or in the first 2 years after a paper comes out? And in some ways, that is a badge of honor that some journals love to have. But actually, the true badge is how many times was your own paper cited? And in some ways, it's kind of intuitive that the more people that can read your paper, probably the more people that will cite your paper, especially from countries around the world that cannot subscribe to these types of journals. So from the publication side, I think it is it's eye-opening to many researchers now that it is a way forward to publish in these journals. I think the data side of this has already been open in some ways, but also has already been closed. I'm a little bit more optimistic about the data because the data that goes into making these publications in many cases is open if a publication is being written. If a trial has failed, it's still cultural that researchers do not typically publish on the failure of their trial, because the reviewers will often say that, well, it messed up because you did this wrong and that wrong, right? Not because of something intrinsic about the science. And so the culture isn't there to submit papers on trial failures or to review them or publish them. And because of that, the data behind those papers never really makes it out there. And so I think it's not just about the payment. I think it's about the cultural aspects as well. To talk about experiments that we do, whether they worked or not, and to release the raw data behind those experiments. It can wait. It doesn't have to be available in real time. I would love it if we had a world like that. Maybe we could wait a year or 2 or 3 for people to publish. But right now, that is, to me, that's a tragedy. I use the word tragedy. I didn't say it's a crime. It's not
Sorry, I think someone
illegal.
tweeted that it was a crime. Okay.
I think it's certainly a tragedy that a lot of that data that we're paying for, we all as taxpayers, never actually makes it out there.
Yeah, okay. And other scientists on the panel, do you have thoughts on this?
So, I mean, kind of, this is a bit strange for me to say, but, or I don't know. So, kind of, if the PDF of the paper, I cannot find it on Google, then I don't read that paper. That's kind of rule of thumb. So at least, for example, in physics and computer science, we are really good at whatever we publish, putting that on the web on our personal homepages, submitting it to like archive or something like that, so that it's very easily accessible, and that really helps, right? It helps disseminate the research, and we don't kind of operate behind these databases and paywalls and things like that, and I think this really helped the community. So I think kind of everyone should be able to do that. I think what is very important is making also releasing the data. And in my group, we are doing this for basically social network data. And I was amazed how successful or how popular is this website, which is just a collection of some random data sets. And I think this basically helps disseminate the science, helps other build on your own work, brings at the end citations, which are the badges we are all about, right? And so on. So I really like this kind of more institutionalized and wider community efforts, and I think they're super important.
Well, I just came up with this cool idea. If I'm in Silicon Valley, so someone will be able to do it before the lunch break, I'm sure. We need to like hack your Fitbit so that every time somebody cites your article, you get a little vibration or something, and there's something that grows to show how many citations you've got. So, you know, you're out doing your own thing, and you get a vibrate, and you're like, what happened? Someone's quoted my
I have to
work.
say, I just have to make a point. So I have this new Pebble watch that I'm wearing right now, and I forgot to turn it off, actually, before coming up here. And so every time someone tweets and essentially cites my name, it's vibrating, actually. So it's already been done in some ways.
So it's happening.
By accident. I'm just seeing people tweeting me right now. Again, by accident. I didn't realize how addicting this is. So excuse me if I keep looking down at people tweeting.
That's okay, that's fine.
But I think the feedback, this kind of sensory feedback that people are citing me is a great idea.
Yeah, how nice to get that positive feedback all the time.
I know, it's in real time right now.
Life.
So
yeah.
it could be there.
Okay then, Gilles.
First of all, having cancer patients not having the ability to get access to everything that is written about their disease, I think is really a tragedy. First thing that should be done is really allow every patient to have access to full-text articles.
Yeah.
You can't really derive real knowledge from abstracts. It's not enough. People really should have access to more.
Oh, but you know what they say, though? If we put that information out there, people don't understand it, they get confused, it'll just stress everybody out.
Well, the problem is
we've
that
all heard those ridiculous arguments.
For sure, but the problem is now you have too many really smart people that are networked, and you can't keep any one of those articles really closed. So you're going to force people to find ways that are not exactly the way it should be done. But I promise you, they will find access to this article within half a day.
Yeah.
So.
And it's interesting, I mean, the concept of open data, even though that's sort of a new term, and yes, you can hash it on Twitter, if you look at the history of religious texts as well, it was a similar thing. So, it was very much in Latin. They purposefully didn't teach lay people how to speak Latin, let alone how to read it. And so they kept all of that knowledge behind maybe not paywalls, but actually physical stone structures. And, and it took some time to break down those stone structures and that barriers, so that I think was it the 1800s or something. It was only just before the printing press or something. I can't remember the exact year now. Sorry, but where the first Bible was actually translated into the language that wasn't Latin, that other people can understand. I think these sort of concepts that we're dealing with here have a lot of similarities.
Yeah,
so I'll pick on this, and I'll tell a story that has nothing to do with health, but has to do with open access to data. Right before the beginning of the Arab Spring, Twitter decided to open their fire hose to anybody. And I like to play with programming. I'm not a good programmer, but I like to have a little fun with it. So I created a Twitter robot that collected everything that came from this fire hose and connected it to Google Translate. And then the stories of the Arab Spring started. And so I decided this is like the perfect experiment. Let's take everything there is about Egypt, one country after the other, and let's put it through this little robot. And so there was the coup, and in 1 hour I had 7 million tweets that were all, 70% of it was in Arabic and translated in real time. And I started to tweet back on Twitter the translation of those articles, of whatever was coming through Twitter. And I fed journalists 10, 15, 20 minutes before they got it from their own organization, what was happening in Cairo. Awesome. They were all sure I was an Israeli agent. I mean, how can you get this kind of information?
Yeah.
And it's just because the data was open.
Yeah. Excellent. That's a cool story. Thank you for sharing.
No, I also have to agree, but I think it's always been this way, I think, for humanity, that those who have information are sometimes powerful, right? And it is unnerving to those individuals when they lose that sort of power. And sometimes this happens quickly with their support when they realize what's happening, and sometimes it happens against them. But it is revolutionary in a physical sense or in a cognitive sense when people lose control of their data. It is unnerving. So.
But they should understand it's not losing control. It's building more. You build more, I'm sure you can keep on having power on the next level.
Well, part of it is putting the value not in having the knowledge, but in how everyone else is using that knowledge, right? When citations are one metric of that, right? But the culture has to change for the whole world on that.
Absolutely.
I mean, there is also something that one has to be very careful about, which is privacy, right? And especially with these online traces, that's something that kind of we in my group, we are super careful about. And I mean, in the domains we are discussing here, those things are even more important. So thinking about that, I think, is also a central theme to sharing data.
Absolutely, but I'll say one thing about privacy is that it's sometimes, okay, maybe I'm being a little too general here, sometimes the fastest way to shut down an open access project is to breathe the word privacy or HIPAA, right? Because it is a scare word in some ways. And so I think de-identification as a science has gotten far, has a long way to go. But I think we cannot let that be a weapon against open access in some ways. It's turning sometimes that way.
Completely agree with you, actually.
I mean, if you live in a democratic system, and I think that so far the internet is pretty much a democratic system, if people know what they are doing and purposely decide that they don't want privacy, no one with expertise should come and bring this down.
Right. I think that's a great point. Actually, just talking to friends at Facebook, I think one of the discussions we had was, can you kind of provide functionality where you as a user could say, I donate all my Facebook data to science, and maybe you as a patient could do the same, say, here's everything about me, use it for the good, right?
Yeah, and there's been work by a lot of individuals on this patient portable consent, because every institution right now has their own consent form for giving that kind of data, and the institutions then feel like they own that data, and that is a world that we really need to change.
Yeah, that's right. We have in Australia, we have a project in Western Australia called the Data Linkage Project. Not a sexy name, but it says exactly what it is, and it's combining different government data sets and that have been around for years and years, and it's the only state in Australia, there's 8 states where I'm from, that actually does this. And Fiona Stanley gave a talk at our big data conference earlier this year, and she flashed it up like it was no big deal, just up on a slide, because people were all, people are always concerned and want to know about privacy. And she just said, oh yeah, we've been doing this for 30 years, we've never had a privacy breach, there's no problems, let's move on. Because of course what we've mainly been talking about today is actually de-identified data as well. And Regina, if anyone's interested, have a chat with Regina and others about the Rainbow Button Initiative, which, and one out of the Blue Button Initiative, and one of them was actually, up and up button, and the idea of you can have my data, I really don't care. If you're going to use it to benefit humanity and others, then I'm really happy for you to share it. And I think a lot of patients do feel that way as well.
Sure. So I think that what Atul said last is really important. Privacy of data. Everybody's talking about big data.
Yeah.
what most people don't really understand is that if you participate in medical research, you do not have any personal, individual right to the data that is collected about you.
That's right.
So if you ask all the big cancer research center, everybody thinks that there is going to be real financial value coming out of big data. They are fighting really hard to collect this data and make sure that they are the only one who can benefit from it. And if you ask them, what kind of policy are you preparing to allow an individual patient who is participating in research to press on a button so that they can get back to them, only to them, the data that you're collecting from them, there is this sudden blank. I asked that at the Institute of Medicine, and I could see that, I mean...
What are they scared of?
Well, they're scared. Everybody's thinking that big data is going to generate intense financial value. It's unproven, but that's what people think. And if there is real value in this huge data set, I want to hold them, because that's where the next 20 years of my income is going to come from.
Okay, cool. So I'm company X, and you three are my participants in trials. And I actually have, I'm really cutting edge in my company. So I have a form where, yes, I agree to give you back your data. And then I suppose, are you saying that because then the three of you, and thanks to social media, you could get together and go, hey, I'm on patients like me too. Do you want my data? I'll put it in there as well. Is that what they're afraid of, that people will actually start? Because if you're having your own data, I don't know how that provides so much threat, but if you combine all of that data.
I can give you a specific example of this, okay? So, there's a patent, for example, for sequencing BRCA1 for breast cancer, and a particular company, Myriad, has that patent, and it's questionable now whether this patent holds up or not, but in some ways, kind of, in their view, might not even matter, because they've been sequencing this gene so many times that they know what the normal variation is. And so, even if now we all can legally sequence this gene, they have the database of what they've been seeing for the past 10, 15, 20 years. And so in some ways, it's not even about getting the data, but it's the database that they built, not even the patent. And so some enterprising folks at UCSF have been really asking patients to donate their results, their test reports, so that they can actually build back a database as well, perhaps even better. And NIH is now funding these types of databases so that becomes a more public access. So, a company has value in patents, but actually a company's value might also be in how they've been measuring things, right? So I think there are real world examples of this that in some ways, companies will feel nervous about handing data right back to a patient that can then self-organize with their group and perhaps devalue them.
Sure. We have seen too many times those patient group coming up with solution to problems, discovering unknown side effects, discovering that you can look at side effects in a different way, that sometimes if you can separate the on-target versus off-target side effects, it's going to change completely how you look at it. Doing things that very few doctors will ever do, and very few researchers will ever do, because their focus is on the patient. That's why you should always have patients involved in everything you do that relates to medicine.
All right, I think that's an excellent point for us to end up our conversation. Gentlemen, thank you so much. It's been an honour, and thank you for having a chat with me on the stage in front of the MedX audience, which will go up online for the whole world to see. So join with me in thanking the guys.
Thank you.